Hey, this is Lifeline for the Frontline, and I'm Kelly Nicholson. Today I'm talking about stats in first responders for PTSD rates and aggravating factors for clinical diagnosis of PTSD. Stay tuned. So I wanted to talk about statistics for a second before I started, because I think we all sort of know that we can generally get a stat for anything that we want to represent. We have to remember that statistics are there to help us recognize patterns. And if you're getting your statistics from a reliable source, that doesn't have any interest in the outcome either way. If all those reliable sources are basically saying the same sort of thing, then we can generally see a pattern, or it creates awareness about where there's a social issue or a problem that needs to be addressed. So with respect to the general population, reliable sources for statistics, it's a tongue twister, they tell us that the general population suffers from clinical symptoms of PTSD in 10% of the population. So then when we look at first responders, generally these reliable sources are saying that first responders are twice as likely than the general population to experience PTSD. So it's a big statement and does show a big problem. But why? I'm going to talk about 5 aggravating factors. The first aggravating factor, repeated exposure to trauma. Obviously, being exposed to trauma on a regular basis is going to impact the way that we cope and our resilience over time. The second is having pre-existing mental health concerns or issues previous to experiencing that trauma. Again, our ability to cope with things is weakened when we're already dealing with a pre-existing mental illness. As part of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about substance abuse here. First responders are more likely, research tells us that first responders are more likely to experience issues with substance abuse. Now, most of the research implies that it's because of that repeated exposure to trauma, but that also means that having that substance abuse issue is also an aggravating factor. The third is having little or no support, social support or professional support. If we don't have that foundation of support with our friends and family, it's really difficult for us to be able to cope with situations if we just don't have people around us to support us and help us. I think most people that have suffered from PTSD will say that their family is the biggest support that they have looked for or have looked to. And the other is organizational support. And I think we're definitely getting there. And there are some organizations, including the one that I came from, that are doing amazing things for the infrastructure of support for their first responders. And I think there's other organizations that are not quite up to speed yet, and that can be for multiple reasons. The fourth aggravating factor is having pre-existing trauma before you experience a trauma. So say, for example, if you have a pre-existing trauma from childhood, like an adverse childhood experience, or if you've experienced a significant trauma before this trauma that you've had, research tells us that we're less likely or less able to process and cope with a traumatic incident if we've had these previous traumas. The last aggravating factor is if you're already dealing with a stressor, say for example, any kind of stressor in your personal life. So if you are going through divorce, you have money problems, or if you are dealing with a health issue, or if you are having considerable issues at work, sometimes the culture can be the biggest stressor. And then that stressor at work makes us vulnerable to developing symptoms and signs of PTSD if we are exposed to a small or big trauma. So those are the 5 aggravating factors. In the next video, I want to talk about what some of the signs and symptoms, and I want to talk about each one individually. Specifically, I want to look at things like anger and social isolation and things that are common in first responders that we don't necessarily pick up on right away as being an indicator that we might be suffering from PTSD. So as always, please like, share, or comment, and subscribe if you like the video and think that other people can benefit from it. Thanks again.